Hi, everybody. I have a sermon that I wanted to share with you. I had prepared this sermon for this past Sunday, March 29th, Lent 5. I was going to preach it at Bethany Lutheran Church, but we do a live stream at Bethany, and so we always get around under 10 people together to help lead through worship. And there's been a little bit of sickness in my household. It doesn't appear to be anything serious, but we wanted to be extra cautious to make sure I wasn't accidentally exposing anyone. So Pastor Gary preached the sermon. He did an incredible job. I'm not trying to upstage him at all, but I had already written this sermon. And so I talked with him and we agreed, that I should record it and just put it out there for the good people of Bethany, for it to be some form of spiritual enhancement to you during the week. If you haven't seen Gary's sermon, I recommend you find it on YouTube. He did a really wonderful job, but here's another take. This is all based on John chapter 11, verses 1 through 45. It's a long verse, so I'm not going to read it to you, but it's that story of the raising of Lazarus. Here it is, a sermon based on John 11, 1 through 45. Please pray with me. May the words of my lips and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Send your living word to walk amongst us now, to challenge our assumptions, to set our hearts ablaze, and to make us whole again. Amen. I was scrolling through Facebook the other day and I noticed a post from my friend. It was very short and succinct and yet extremely poignant. My friend's post simply said, "Public service announcement. Today is Thursday." I've been seeing a lot of reflections like this lately where everyone's rhythm is just so out of whack. Things are so confusing and different and odd, and it seems like you can't even keep track of what day of the week it is. Because every day is pretty much like the one right before it, right? And so it gets really confusing. And this messing up of time, I've noticed it goes even further than that. We are still in the month of March. Can you believe that? The month of March, I swear, is the absolute longest month that I've ever experienced. I want you to think about it. You might have been saying to yourself, Pastor Nate really hasn't preached a sermon at Bethany in a long time. And I know maybe it feels that way, but guess what? I did preach a sermon in the month of March, believe it or not. But that's just how long this month is. The Lenten retreat that many of you went on, that was in the middle of March. Our Ash Wednesday service, also March, if you can believe it. It's just amazing how long this month has felt just because everything is out of whack and out of rhythm. And so this messing up of time is actually something I wanted to reflect on today, because the concept of time is something that Christians are invited to think a little differently about. You see, in our gospel passage, we actually get a brief little picture of this with the way that Jesus behaves and acts. I always thought it was so odd that when the message comes from Mary and Martha to Jesus that Lazarus is sick, we learn in the text that Jesus waited 2 more days before he went to Bethany to visit Lazarus. And now it's not as if he was doing anything miraculous or spectacular in those 2 days. At least the gospel writer John doesn't tell us what happened in that 2-day time. It just tells us that Jesus seemed pretty unconcerned. He knew Lazarus was sick, and all he says is that this is happening so that God's glory can be revealed. And then he waits 2 days before he does anything. And it's extremely odd that Jesus seems so unconcerned, because when he finally gets to Bethany and he learns that Lazarus has died, he's very upset. He gets angry, it says a couple times, and then we hear that famous verse, Jesus weeps. He is emotionally deeply moved by the entire circumstance. And so how do these two things fit together? With Jesus being seemingly at first so unconcerned with what's happening, so confident that God's glory will somehow be revealed through the Lazarus situation, and yet at the same time, deeply emotionally affected by his friend's death. What this gospel passage is inviting us to see is that both of these things can be true. You very well might be deeply affected right now by everything that's going on in the world. You might be afraid. You might be sad. You might be frustrated. There is a breadth of emotions that we're all experiencing at this present moment. And I want you to know that that's okay. But I also want to invite you to have some confidence in the promises of God. You see, that's part of what Jesus was revealing here. Jesus had confidence that God was still in control, even though the present moment was deeply emotionally affecting him. Both of these things can be true. In our society, this can be hard to wrap our mind around, though, right? Our Christian perspective invites us to see time in such a way that there are future promises of God on the horizon, and yet we glimpse them in this moment today. But that gets all messed up because of the way our world runs, right? We are very future focused, but we're focused on, right, like finding the next big thing, getting the newest iPhone whenever it comes out and getting excited about that, right? The latest update, the latest advancement. We are constantly looking and planning for the future. And as a result of that, we can lose insight on how important the present moment actually is, and how God is still present with us right now. You see, Jesus modeled that for us in the gospel passage. He did have an understanding of God accomplishing future promises, but he was still deeply grounded in what was happening right in front of him. And so you can be upset and mourning right now. I want you to know that. There's a lot to be sad about. It's not just the loss of friends or family, although that can be devastating, obviously. But I understand also that people are out there right now and you're mourning the loss of graduation. You're mourning the loss of a spring sports season. You're mourning the loss of a vacation or a trip. All of these hopes that you had for the future, these things that you had been looking forward to, suddenly they're not going to happen. And it's sad, and it's frustrating, and you're wondering why God would let something like that happen. But I want you to know that Jesus is present with you here in this moment. Jesus knows what it's like to be deeply moved, to be angry about a situation, to be mourning the loss of a friend, to be frustrated by the way of the world. Jesus experienced all of that. And so that means that we believe in a God who knows what it's like to suffer through a moment in time like this. But we also believe in a God who has promised something even better in the future. Our Christian understanding of time allows us to see the present moment, yes, as difficult and still infused with God's presence. And our Christian understanding of time allows us to see that the future still has hope and beauty and resurrection on the horizon. This is a picture of St. Michael's Lutheran Church. It's not the congregation that I served in Philadelphia, but it was one that was really close to where I lived in Philadelphia. And St. Michael's is over 300 years old. And as you see in the picture, its graveyard was in the front of the church. Even though the church was on a main drag, the graveyard is what you had to walk through in order to go in the front door. The truth is, a lot of old churches are built like this, where they have a graveyard right on site. And even a lot of churches are built like St. Michael's, where the graveyard is in the front of the church. And that was intentional. You see, because the idea was that as you walked into church on your way to worship on a Sunday morning, you would have to walk past the grave sites of all of your ancestors. All of these people who probably taught you the faith. All these people who had passed on in the faith. And it was this idea that they were still present with you as you worshiped together. In fact, they were waiting alongside of you in the present moment as everyone looked towards the future and when Christ came again. This is how our faith invites us to think about time. We believe that in some way, the past and the present kind of get folded in on one another. Those who have passed on in the faith are still somehow here with us, the great communion of saints. And together we're all waiting for that expected future that God has promised us, when Jesus will return and God will put back together and fully redeem and resurrect all of this broken world. This is the promise and the beauty and the invitation of our faith, is to experience life in this way. You see, we see it in the gospel reading about Lazarus. Jesus is fully present in the moment. He experiences it fully and wholly. He weeps and he gets angry and he's there for his friends. And yet, Jesus also knows that there's bigger promises still at work. And he gives us a glimpse of it, right? He raises Lazarus from the dead. And maybe you've never experienced something quite like that, but there are these moments in our life where God breaks in, right? Where we feel the presence of God with us in this moment. And we know deep down in our soul that there's something more waiting for us. That there is a future, that the promises of God are true. It's the fancy theological term for this is prolepsis. Right? We talk about it as a foretaste of the feast to come. In some ways, this present moment that, can be really, really difficult. In some miraculous ways, God still breaks in and gives us a glimpse of what's to come later on in the future. This is how we're invited to handle a present moment like this. It's really hard right now. And I invite you to know that Jesus is with you, weeping alongside of you at times like this. But that's not the full story either. Jesus is weeping alongside of you, and Jesus is also making the miraculous happen each and every day. And the promises don't stop there. Because those moments when God breaks in, they're but a foretaste of the feast to come. Yeah, Lazarus was raised from the dead, but that's nothing compared with the resurrection of Jesus that takes place on Easter Sunday. And there's going to come a day when all of this will be over, when we'll go back to life seemingly almost as normal as it was before. You'll get to go back to your jobs or to your schools or to your friends or to your place of worship. You'll get out of your house and it'll be a wonderful, glorious, incredible, exciting, seemingly miraculous day. And it'll be nothing compared to the glorious resurrection that God has promised each and every one of us at the end of time. You see, friends, that's how we have to handle present moments like this. We're wholly present in what's happening right in front of us, but we also know that there's hope on the horizon. We know that God's promise is so much bigger, so much better than anything we can even imagine right now. I pray that you can live like this at this incredible time in our lives together. Be present in the moment, but never lose the hope of God's promised future. Amen.